What's up everybody, it's Rafi from ZURB and I got part 5 of our series on Panini. Now it's been a wild ride and I really appreciate all the questions and comments that have come through this entire series, so thank you. Now if you're just tuning in and you haven't seen all the previous videos, make sure to check out the entire thing. I'm going to link it right here. And this week we're going to step it up a notch. Last week we talked about Panini's handlebar helpers and data. Now we're going to take everything that we've learned in this entire series, put it all together into some really advanced examples, things that we use here at ZURB, and things that you're going to use in your client projects to really step up your workflow. Okay, so we got a lot of really cool stuff to show you. Let's check it out. Alright, so the first advanced example I want to show you is something that people ask about all the time. How do you set the active class on menu items depending on the page that you're on? So for example, we have our sidebar here for our foundation docs, and when I click into a particular page, you can see that now it has the active class and it's highlighting the particular page we're on. So that's done with Panini's handlebar helpers. So I'm going to show you how to do that, and it's super quick and easy. So this is an optimization that you're going to do often, so it definitely helps to have this ability. And the reason for that is we have this one component that is a reusable component. We can create a partial for it and then reuse it across multiple pages. Just because one piece of HTML, this class attribute, changes on every particular page, it wouldn't make sense to create separate partials for each particular page, and it also wouldn't make sense to have this code embedded on every single page. That really reduces your maintainability of the code itself. So what we're going to do is use the IfPage Helper to change the class based on the page that we're on. Now we can go ahead and wrap the IfPage Helper around this particular piece of code here. So class equals active, and now we're going to name a page. So I want this to be on the installation page. So I don't need to type in the entire page with the file extension. I just need to type in installation, and Panini will know that that's the installation page. So if page installation, and then we need to close this statement around the class. And so we'll use our handlebar syntax again, and we'll close the if page. So this is what it looks like for this first list item. So we have the class inside. Now you can actually do this a different way if you're going to maybe chain multiple classes onto this list item in the future. It might be better to do it this way and put the IfPage helper directly inside of the quotes. So we'll put it directly inside of the quotes. That way, if we need to add more classes later on, we can definitely add them here, like that, and still have this IfPage helper create the active class as needed for the particular page. So now I'm going to skip ahead and finish putting this on the remaining pages. Alright, so now we have all of our active classes set up in this with the IfPage helper. So every time that we hit a particular page where the name actually matches, let's say this last list item, kitchen sink, it's going to have the active class on it, and only on that particular page. So that's how you would change the active class based on the page that you're on. Alright, so for our next advanced example, we're going to take a look at this filter nav that we use on our building block site. So this navigation can be reused on multiple pages, and actually when one of these filters is clicked, and I'm saying filters in double quotes, it's actually going to go to another page, and the active class needs to change depending on the page that it's on. But we also don't want to maintain all this HTML directly in the page, so we created a partial. But we also want to optimize these icons and text, because they're also things that are very similar in format and style, and I'll show you how to do that with data. So if we hop over to the actual code and we just take a look at the set of buttons that creates this thing, it's quite a mess. We have button here, button here, button here, so there's like 8 buttons with images and then spans and all kinds of classes. So all of this could be really simplified and optimized into just something that's much more maintainable. So I'm going to go through step by step and show you how to do that. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is to remove all this extra crap. So there's no reason I need to have all 8 buttons embedded in this page. It just makes it really clunky and hard to maintain. So I'm going to simplify this down to a single button template. So this navigation is a series of buttons. I'm just going to create a template where I'm injecting content into using data. So first off, what I'm going to do after I've removed all these buttons is to add some places where I'm going to inject some data. So I'm going to type in classes here, and classes is a common variable that we like to use here, and it's just a place for you to add any kind of custom classes. And next we're going to get rid of this embedded image, and we're going to put in the image tag. So, or image variable, sorry. So image, we'll create that there. And this way we'll control the image path in the data. Okay, and then from here, we'll also set up the title. And over here, the title is also the same. So this is an alt tag, so we should put title icon. So something that's a little bit more descriptive. So it's going to inject the title or the name of this icon, and then the word icon right here is already there. And then we're going to reuse the title again here. So title is being used a few times, and that way title is going to be injected here. So we're going to wrap this in an each helper, which we've talked about before. So the each helper iterates through how many times we have this data. So I'm going to just first of all set it up. So I'm going to wrap this button in each, and now I'm going to add my parameters. So I have gone ahead and set up a data file. So if we go over to our source folder and data, we have a global.yaml folder. So we're going to point to global. And now we have a specific variable in global that we're going to store all these values. So if we hop over to that, it's called filter nav. So in the last lesson, we talked about how to set up the data, and it looks like this. So we have filter dash nav, and then the colon, and then the syntax for YAML to create an object is this dash, and then inside the object we'll create all of our, or we'll define all of our variables. So image, title, alt, and classes. And so actually, if this one is called alt, we'll go ahead and change that there. Okay, so now I can call this each helper to look at the global folder, and inside the global folder call filter nav. Again, filter nav is what we're naming this array right here. So this set of data is called filter nav, and so we'll save that. And what this is going to do is now iterate through the amount of data that we have So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. 7 pieces of data. That means we should have 7 icon buttons. So hopping back over to our example, as you can see here, now we have 7 icon buttons all set up nicely with just one really simple piece of markup. So the each helper comes in handy. We're pointing to our global file that holds our data, and then filter nav is the specific set of content that's being injected into these particular spots here. So that's a really neat way to set this up, and it really helps us maintain all of our information in one simple place. Alright, so now that we have our navigation filters all set up in data, and we have all our data being injected properly, we're going to need to change the active class based on the page that we're in. Now, this button is not being repeated multiple times in this partial, so it's not going to be something that we do right in the HTML like we did before. It's going to be slightly different. We're still going to use an IfPage Helper though, so let's go ahead and set that up. So we're going to use our IfPage, just like we did before, to create active classes on navigation links. And we're going to pass in a variable here called page. Okay, and then we're going to put our active class inside of that. And now we're going to close that. All right, so we're closing our IfPage around active. So we're going to be able to use this piece of code here. So it says IfPage Helper and matches the variable page, then display the active class in here. So now we're going to hop over to our global data, and in the filter nav objects, we're going to add our page variable. So we're going to call it page, and in this case, it's going to be featured. And you want to wrap this particular code because it needs to be in quotes, just like you would for any IfPage helper. You actually wrap the string inside quotes. So we're actually putting the quotes here inside of the data. And just to show you how that works, we're going to set up another one here. So we're going to actually set this up on the index page. Again, you want to wrap that in the quotes. Could be single quotes or double quotes. And we'll save that. Now this global YAML file is not being watched for changes, so we do need to go back and save here on our regular HTML. And then if we hop over to our example, we can see that that has now updated, and we have the active class on the navigation because this is the index page. The parameters match, and now we're showing the active class on that page. So this is how you can mix and match data with all kinds of helpers like each and IfPage to really make a complex component much simpler on your page and make it more maintainable. All right, and now I want to show you an example of how to create different types of component based on the use case that you have. So you can use Panini to create different types of component that share some of the same base code. So something like this card here. We have this card that has this nice hover effect, and it also has this C code section, but then also like a preview link. So they're like two separate actions when you hover over it. And so the structure of this card also contains a header section with the label for the version, and then there's also some meta information like who created it and how many views it's had and so forth. Now we might have another place on the page where we want it to look a little bit different, or on our website. So we're going to hop over to a different page and see how it looks differently and then how we can optimize this. Okay, so hopping over to another location on our site, we're creating another type of this card component, but now it looks a little bit different. So it still has a hover effect, but it does not have the bottom section with the metadata, and it doesn't have the hover effect on the bottom section either. So this is a little bit different type of card. It uses a lot of the same base styles. So instead of making two different pieces of HTML or two different card partials and then having to maintain those two different card partials, we can make this one partial, maintain it in one file, and just have Panini take care of the different use cases or the different types. So hopping over to our building block card, which is the component in question, we're going to set this up using Panini Helpers to actually create a type. So what we're going to do is take the more complex form of this card and we're going to wrap this in Panini Helpers. So the title section is up here. We want to keep that, but everything from this section down to here needs to be shown only in a specific type. So let's set that up. So we're going to use the Panini helper if equal. Okay, so if equal can pass in a variable. So we're going to pass in a custom variable called type. So you can name this anything you want. I chose type because it makes sense for setting up different types of cards that reuse the same basic structure and CSS by that matter. So if equal type, and now we're going to pass in a string here, which we can call anything we want. So I'm going to call this detailed card. Okay, so if equal type detailed card, and now I'm going to close this down here with the / if equal. Okay, so now this content that's wrapped inside this if equal helper will only show if the type equals detailed card. And of course I'm going to do the same thing for this bottom section down here. So we have this link that shows up on hover. We don't need that anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing there. Okay, so it's a best practice to exclude components or wrap the if equal helper around the more complex part of your component and leave the more simple part as the default state. It's just more maintainable that way. So that's what I've done here. So now if I hop back over to my pages, they're obviously going to show the simpler version here. If I hop back to my home page, also the simpler version is showing here. But this is the page on the home page where I want the more complex version to show, the detailed version. So I'm going to hop back over into my code, and I'm going to now find that place where this component is called. So it's called right here, building block card. Now I'm going to use that type that I just created. So type equals, and then I'm going to name it the same thing. So I named it detailed card. So I'm going to put that in the type, save that, and then I'm going to hop back over into my example here, and now you can see that I have the detailed card on the home page. And then if I go over to the building block page where I want the simpler version, you can see that that's what we get there. So already an easy way to set up different types, reusing the same HTML, CSS with just slight variations in the HTML. Again, this saves you from having to create multiple partials for similar components, and really like less code is more maintainable, less bugs, less headaches in the long run. So definitely keep it simple. Alright, so lastly, I want to show you how to create your own Handlebars helpers. Now, Panini works with any other handlebar helper out there written in JavaScript, so you can find a whole lot out there and then integrate it into your Panini project. So I'm going to show you how to do that. We're going to start by creating a helper folder. So in the source file, we're going to create a new folder, and this is just in the root directory, and we're going to call it Helpers. So this Helpers folder is actually being watched by the gulp file automatically. So if we go over to gulp file and look at the Panini setup, you can find the pages function. The pages function is what controls Panini, and this Panini pipe is all the things that happen that are processed automatically. So Helpers is one of the processes that's running. It's looking in the source folder, root directory. It's looking for the folder called Helpers. Now, if you wanted to name your Helpers folder something custom, you can definitely do that. For example, we're going to name it Panini Helpers instead. So then you would change that and save that. Now, when you make a change to the gulp file, you will need to restart npm start because this is not being watched for changes. It's not changed very often, so that's the reason for that. So then we'll go ahead in here and rename this to match what we put in our gulp file, Panini Helpers. But out of the box, the helper folder is what's being watched for. So in the Panini Helper folder, I'm going to put my new file, and I'm going to call it month year, and then the file extension is JS because we're going to be putting JavaScript into this. Now, I already have a little snippet that I like to use for this. So basically, this is going to create variables for the month and the year, and then it's going to print them out in this type of format, so this string here. And then I can use CSS in my actual page, like I can put this inside of like a span or something, and then target it with CSS and change how it looks. So I'll save that. And now we'll hop into the HTML and put the include or the variable in and show you how that renders. Okay, so now we want to go ahead and add this into our page. So I'm going to decide that we want it next to these labels right here for the version, and I want to put the post date in there. So I'm going to hop into my partial here that has all my header stuff, and now I'm going to call that new variable that I just created. So we're going to make a span. I'm going to give it a class of post date perhaps, and then I'm going to put in my handlebar variable right here. So I'm calling month year. It's the same name as the helper that we created right here. So it's basically going to reference this JavaScript and then output the month and year. So I save that. If I hop back over to my example, I now have the month and year printed out here, and I can use that span class that I created and style it any way that I want. So that is a simple example of how to create a handlebar helper in Panini. Damn, that's a lot of stuff. And by now, you can cook up a panini like a master chef. No, but seriously, Panini and this workflow is going to save you a lot of time, energy, a lot of mistakes, and it's also going to make you an organizational hero. So if you bring this workflow into your own projects or your company, you're going to look like a coding master, and that's what we want. We're putting out lessons every week, and we don't want you to miss the next one, so make sure you hit subscribe up above so that way the Yeti can get some new shoes. He's looking at those Yeezys. So thanks everybody for watching. Really love all the energy and the excitement, and we'll see you next week.